Welcome to the Nerd Party.
Hello and welcome to the A24 project here on the Nerd Party Network. My name is Lee Hutchison, and Dallas King and I make our way through the A24 filmography, and along the way bring you interviews with the talent involved in front of and behind the camera. In this episode, we review You Hurt My Feelings, starring Julia Louis-Dreyfus, Tobias Menzies, and Arian Moayed. So, Beth is a novelist whose long-standing marriage is suddenly upended when she overhears her therapist husband Don giving his honest and negative reaction to her latest book. So, You Hurt My Feelings is finally coming to the UK on Prime Video on the 8th of August. But Dallas, this is another one where you've been waiting for me for months to catch up on. So, you've had Talk to Me recently where you had to wait about 8 months for me to see. You have had to wait for me to see Past Lives, which I'll finally get to see in a few weeks. How long have you been waiting for me to see You Hurt My Feelings?
At the same time, 8 months. This was another one of the A24's bumper Sundance film festival. I mean, I think I saw 3 or 4 films at the Sundance Film Festival online. I missed Earth Mama, just because I hadn't realized A24 had released that. But yeah, no, there was You Hurt My Feelings, Deepest Breath, which we covered a couple of weeks ago. So yeah, Sundance is finally hitting the UK. So yeah, no, it was a very good Sundance for A24. Was it as, I guess, were they as good for you? I guess we're going to find out on this episode.
Yeah, so obviously people are not going to hear us talking behind this film's back because we're going to lay it out on the table. But what did you think of You Hurt My Feelings and so on? Like, it for me, I got echoes very early on of sort of Woody Allen style movies, focused on that white middle to upper class New Yorkers and their challenges and the arts and such. Like, what did you make of? What was your kind of early impressions of this film?
Obviously didn't know much sort of going in. It pretty much got announced probably about a month before sort of Sundance, so I knew the sort of the basic premise. Fan of Julia Louis-Dreyfus, so and the director Nicole Holofcener. So I was like, yeah, no, I'm in. Obviously, it was set in New York, another tick for me, obviously. So when I watched it, I mean, I came away thinking that what, this is the epitome of a three-star film. This is, it's, an enjoyable watch. Is it the greatest film in the world? No. Is it a bad film? No. It's the kind of film which is enjoyable to watch. For me, the really interesting stuff happens after the film, kind of, in that it's the conversations that it sparks with either your partner, if you've happened to watch that film together, or even sort of friends, because the premise, essentially here is, she's a celebrated, author. She'd written an autobiography, memoir sort of thing, which had done reasonably well, and now this is her first work of fiction, and she's getting to the stage where it's about to be published, and she's doing her final drafts, and she's asked her husband for his honest opinion, which was glowing. He's very supportive of his wife. It then turns out that he was not as honest with her. Maybe he told a little white lie here and there about the quality of her work, and she overhears this, and then it sends her into a complete spiral, about her abilities as an author, but also the marriage in general. If he's lied about this, what else has he lied about, and stuff like that. So I think it's a fun film to watch in the conversations it will spark after, and potential arguments that it could spark afterwards. It reminded me of another film that she did, the remake of Force Majeure, where it was like, what would you do in that situation where, obviously, it's a remake of the Ruben Östlund film where, a family is on holiday at a ski resort and there's an avalanche and the dad just legs it, leaving the mum and the kid behind. And it's like, oh gosh, what do we do? And then yeah, so it had parallels of that to me as well. So yeah, it was about what happens after the film when you start getting into that, and would you be are you being honest because you're being supportive, or do you really want the truth? Do you really want to hear the honest truth? That's kind of basically the crux of this situation, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's interesting because I had the same where, truth be told, I'm the same as you. It's like it was such a 3 star but quite passive movie. Like I was watching it on my TV. You know, we were lucky enough to get a screener copy, and I just sort of like. I think I did a double bill that day of sort of A24 films where I watched Deepest Breath in the morning and then I watched this in the afternoon. And it was one of those ones kind of watching it. We were both sort of on our couch and just kind of just sort of drifting away quite a bit during it. So much so that we never nap, but we felt that we needed a nap after watching this film. And I don't necessarily think that's too much of a criticism of the film. It's just sort of like it's just you kind of just take it in, like even like the drama that the film is based on doesn't seem to sort of really kick off until much later into the film. I think it's well over halfway before someone overhears like, what did you think of like the novel, which you'd feel would be like the kind of sort of like the main crux of what it was going to be. Instead it was kind of just like there's stuff about sort of someone starring in a play, or no, they're not going to be in the play now. It's sort of stuff about sort of their son being a bit embarrassed that they share ice cream. We're going to meet her grandmother, sort of her mother, sorry, and just sort of like they're doing stuff at the local kind of charity donation. There was just kind of a lot of these things where I'm like, oh, this is just not quite interesting. We're getting their lives, but I don't think it's particularly, what should be the thrust of the movie and so on. And it just felt like it took a long time to really get going. I mean, we did get introduced to kind of this sort of like imposter syndrome that they're kind of feeling, which was quite interesting. But for me, it was just sort of like something I wasn't particularly engaging with personally.
Yeah, well, I am a writer. I write film reviews. I've written articles. I've written a book about New York film locations. So I mean, I did get into that headspace of I have asked people for feedback on my writing, and they've said, "Oh yeah, no, it's really good." And then it's like now I'm thinking like, did they mean it? And now I'm second guessing myself, and it's like, yeah, it's not a nice headspace to be in, especially obviously, being like a writer, especially about film, whatever you're sending off pictures and articles and stuff like that, and then you get either no reply whatsoever or a negative reply, and you start it's that sort of shame smile. Am I good enough? Should I just quit and all that sort of thing? So I was definitely in her headspace for a long time and could completely sort of buy into her character and stuff like that. So it did engage me in that as well. But like you say, the other sort of subplots that were going around were did feel slightly unnecessary, especially for a film which is was quite short. But then the one that did actually intrigue me was actually the one of the husband as a therapist who wasn't really enjoying being a therapist, but then was getting sued by a couple who had essentially come to the decision that they were going to get divorced. Therapy wasn't working, but then decided to sue him because they wanted all the money back they'd spent on therapy because they felt that it hadn't worked. And I was thinking, oh, I mean, that is actually a really interesting point because a lot of people do that. I've done some therapy as well, and it's like there there isn't no real sort of endpoint. It's like, what point do you sort of call it quits on that and whatever? And then, if you don't feel you've got anything from it, it's like, where do you have a leg to stand on? It was just like, yeah, they're never going to get that back. But it was interesting that in America, if there's blame, there's a claim. They love to sue people over there. So yeah, no, that was for me possibly the most interesting subplot of the film.
Yeah, it's interesting. I had that down as questions to ask you. I suppose, like, in a way, we are almost these kind of characters to an extent. I mean, I work in a world where at times,
Wait, hang on. Have you been lying to me about my writing?
for me, I thought of that because I was like, oh, Dallas is a writer and so on, and reviews films. You obviously, I'm going to be asking you about obviously the New York connection with this, but you've written a book and so on, and how challenging it is actually to get that kind of genuine feedback and so on. And do you, like, obviously Beth has that sort of imposter syndrome to an extent. How do you feel as a writer? Because it's something I've never envied people that are writers. It's such a largely solitary process. People put work out into the world. Completing a novel is no chance that it even gets published at all. It's a 1 in a million shot at times. Like, what's it like for you to put yourself out there and just ask, I guess, the bare minimum of people to get some honest feedback, and maybe when you've received maybe something that's been maybe a bit of a knock on the nose?
Yeah, it's interesting because I work at the libraries in Aberdeen, so we've had many author talks and stuff like that, and they've a lot of them have talked about the benefit of having like a really good editor, like someone who's that is their job. They know what sells, they know what doesn't, so they will go through your work and they will potentially rip it to shreds. But the idea is, they've obviously seen something in the work that they like and will think will sell, so that's why they've taken them on as a writer, and they're just basically they're critiquing it to make your work better. When I wrote my book on New York film locations, that was entirely self-published, so I didn't have an editor. But basically, I would send copies to my family, my partner, my friends, and stuff like that. Say, what do you think? And then it's like they will give feedback and stuff like that. And then it's like, but then you think, oh no, but I kind of did. I kind of liked that bit that I wrote. And then it's like tough. And I think it's was it the phrase, you've got to be ready to kill your darlings or kill your babies. You've got to be willing to sacrifice like a really good scene or a good chapter or a good paragraph or whatever in order to make the work. But it might be completely superfluous. But you really liked it. But if it doesn't move it forward, then you have to lose it. And so yeah, no, it can be a very difficult place. But I think it probably helps to have someone who you are not particularly well, not close to, but that I think there is that blurring of the lines when you are asking friends and family and stuff like that because they don't want to hurt your feelings. And so therefore that's when the little white lies may sort of come in. It's like, are you looking for honest feedback or are you looking for to I'm basically looking for you to say that I'm ace and I'm wonderful and everything I'm doing is great. There's a fine line between those two.
Yeah, and I'm on the other side. Part of my job does involve sort of providing sort of one-to-one sessions with individuals that might be struggling with mental health, anxiety, for example, and it is a common feeling to just sort of sit there and there is an element of listening and so on and providing advice and support, but at the same time there's often elements where you have your own imposter syndrome of like, why am I in a position to offer advice? And for people that have kind of got long-term challenges or frustrations, I do buy into the element that people have to help themselves to an extent and so on, and you kind of have to help someone get to that destination. But for a lot of people, they often see something as quite passive, and it's just asking sort of like maybe closed questions, open questions, and so on, and kind of the work a kind of therapist or someone that works in sort of that kind of well-being and providing that one-to-one kind of listening might actually look like they're not doing much, especially when you look at the financial cost that goes along with things like that as well, where I sometimes have to deliver like training, for example, in my job, and it comes at like a pretty expensive cost. There are things available out there that offer similar for free, for example. I would certainly think what we do is better, but I've often had it where I'm like, oh, I'm delivering a service for X amount, it better be good, it better be this amazing, and so on. Why am I in a position where people are spending money to hear me tell people things that I feel are pretty basic information, but people don't know what they don't know, and there's just, you get into your head with these sorts of things, and it can be so difficult. So I could certainly relate to kind of the Dan character to an extent. It can be a frustrating world, kind of providing that sort of kind of, I guess, type of therapy.
Yeah, and sort of speaking, sort of like just discussing it here, it makes me wonder. Because of the Julia Louis-Dreyfus element in this film, it's like I can almost see like this central crux problem of the film being like a Seinfeld episode, like where Jerry finds out that like Elaine or whatever it was like has lied to him about really liking like his stand-up set, and he's like, "What do you mean you didn't like the stand-up set? I thought you said you told me you liked it," and stuff like that, and then that being a whole thing for like an episode, where he's trying to get over the fact that they've lied to him about a joke or something that that was meant to be the funniest joke in the world, but then they actually said actually no, it wasn't that funny behind his back or something like that.
So what did any of the kind of performances, I guess, kind of stand out for you, Dallas?
I mean, Julia Louis-Dreyfus, yeah, no, she was great and had the right level of neurosis, but also sort of you were able to, I could certainly empathize with her as well. Tobias Menzies is an actor that I'm aware of. So he's done a lot of British stuff. I think he's in The Crown as one of the iterations of Prince Philip, I think. But I hadn't really seen him in much. No, I thought he was good, and sort of then it was nice to see like Ariane Moad from Succession and from the Broadway hit play The Dollhouse, which I saw on Broadway live. So I've got a playbill signed by him somewhere. I remember that he was in the queue and people were just asking him, saying, "Oh, great show, blah blah blah," but then asking him about Succession. He's saying, "I'm not going to spoil it for you." Obviously, it was like about 2 weeks away from starting on season 4, so it was like he knew that people were going. He was like, "Nah, no Succession spoilers from me." So
Did you notice there was another member of Succession in this film as well?
no, I didn't. Who was that?
The mother is she plays Sid in Succession. She's the one that sort of heads up ATN News.
Oh no, I completely missed that. It's been a while. I haven't seen season 4, and I still saw the other 3 seasons probably like a year ago or something. So yeah, no, I'm not fully up on my Succession.
Yeah, very different looking character. In like Succession, she's got like a lot of like plastic surgery looking on her. And when I saw her in this, I was like, oh my god, it's actually really amazing makeup. But yeah, she's the head honcho of ATN and so on. So she kind of starts to appear in sort of season 2 and across a few episodes. So as someone that loves Succession, it was quite nice to see some of these as well. But and as you mentioned earlier on, and I mean, you didn't even need to plug your own book because I was going to ask you anyway, but you obviously wrote the literal book on New York filming locations. What did you make? Yeah, what did you make of the kind of choices and locations? Again, it was things that felt like I wouldn't have been surprised to see them in a Woody Allen style film as well.
It did have, yeah, sort of, I guess, the sort of neurotic writers therapy. Yeah, it does sort of scream Woody Allen, doesn't it? I mean, obviously that's kind of like a bad thing to scream these days, but yeah, no, I mean it did. It was a very typical New York film, especially sort of upper sort of West Side New York, sort of nice, sort of living in plush apartments and stuff like that. So yeah, no, it screamed sort of New York. It was like a it was an interesting choice of location though for the they went tie shopping. I think it took a while for them to pick out a tie and stuff like that. Um, but yeah, no, it yeah, just the choice of locations and the actors and that like and yeah, everything screamed. You could basically say, just put it on without any sort of, establishing shots or whatever. Ask someone, where was this film set, and they'd be able to say New York. So
Yeah, excellent. So it sounds like kind of yeah. If it's one of the things I was kind of reflecting on this earlier on, where like as you mentioned, it's a 3 out of 5 film, and I guess you've had sort of the advantage of seeing maybe things like kind of Past Lives, for example, and then obviously you mentioned last week, Talk to Me really stood out. But like we are over the halfway point of the year when it comes to sort of like the A24 filmography. What have maybe been some of the standouts for you this year so far? I mean, obviously, there's maybe still some things to come. Obviously, Past Lives, I haven't had the chance to see it, but really this year, what we've kind of had is When You Finish Saving the World, Close, Sharper, Pie, Beau Was Afraid, You Hurt My Feelings, The Deepest Breath, Stephen Curry Underrated, and Talk to Me. Obviously, in the UK so far, obviously in America, I've had a couple of extra things, but has this been like a vintage year for you so far, Dallas? Or is it one of those ones compared to maybe other years where by this time last year we kind of had After Sun, we had Pearl, for example, Everything Everywhere All at Once. After Yang,
And of course, the Oscar winner, Everything Everywhere All at Once. Yeah, if you compare year on year, it has not been a banner year for A24, it has to be said, with the exception of sort of Past Lives. For me, Talk to Me was a great hit, but very much in a sort of the niche genre of horror. I mean, there's still time to redeem themselves. Dependent strike, dependent, of course, depending if things stick to release dates. I know that the Iron Claw, the story of the Von Erich wrestling family, starring Zac Efron and Jeremy Allen White, whatever, that's now been dated for December. Priscilla is going to debut at the Venice Film Festival before going to Toronto. And then, of course, there is Jonathan Glazer's Zone of Interest, which was an award winner at Cannes, and I think is being set up as it was definitely going to be obviously a potential awards frontrunner. If indeed, they do decide to push ahead and push for this year. I mean, obviously A24 is in a interesting position, sort of strike wise, in that they've obviously agreed to all of SAG-AFTRA's, not demands, but requests, and they said fine. So they have a clean bill and could, potentially, actually they're free to produce and distribute if they so wish. Obviously, a lot of their actors will still be tied up and not able to promote films because they're still tied under that. But yeah, it's going to be interesting to see whether or not they are fully supportive of the strikes and decide not to release anything, or if they stick to their head schedules. Because obviously, if other things such as Warner Brothers at the moment are contemplating moving things like Dune 2, The Color Purple, etc. If some of the big sort of award contenders potentially move to next year, there's obviously they might have a clearer run with the likes of Past Lives and Zone of Interest. Could they be looking at 2 Best Picture winners in a row? It certainly would erase the Neon years, where they seem to be playing second fiddle to Neon. Neon still obviously have, I think, is it 4 Palme d'Or winners in a row? But yeah, they could go for. I think Past Lives would probably be their um, strongest contender. I think at this stage. I think Zone of Interest, depending on which language it's technically filmed in, it could potentially go to best film not in the English language.
Oh, I never considered that. That's the one I'm kind of hoping is going to be part of the London Film Festival announcement in maybe like a couple of weeks' time. That's one I'm really hoping for.
Yes, yes. It's not playing it. I think it might be at Telluride, but I don't think it's playing at TIFF. It might pop up at New York Film Festival. They don't mind screening films which have been on at other ones. TIFF and Telluride are normally a bit more sniffy about that sort of thing. But yes, given Jonathan Glazer is a UK born director, it makes perfect sense for that one to pop up there. And then we'll just have to wait to see for the release date. But yes, they could end. They could have a strong ending to the year, even if the first half has not been on a par with 2022 so far.
Well, you never know. We might be talking about a film that is maybe it could be a copying the 5 stars you gave Talk to me, or maybe it's going to hit the 3 stars when we're back next week to talk about Stephen Curry, Underrated. Thanks everyone for listening. Bye.
Spoiler, it won't.